Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. Today I'm going to look at Christopher Hitchens. I heard a friend recently describe Hitchens as someone with solid arguments, which distressed me greatly because the man is a clown. I mean that in a nearly literal sense. He was a performer without substance. To prove my point, we're going to look at his famous rant about how Christianity, and Islam, turn life and death into a spiritual North Korea. The man has done huge amounts of work, most of which I have neither read or seen, so of course I can't say with certainty that he didn't have any rational, well-thought-out arguments based on premises which are not verifiably false. Let's just say I lack a belief that he had any. I am open to evidence that he did, but remember that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. He spent most of his life as a Marxist. Right there, it tells you that he was not good at being correct. Let's jump in.
Some people I know who are atheists will say they wish they could believe it. Some people I know who are former believers say they wish they could have their old faith back. They miss it. I don't understand this at all. I think it's an excellent thing that there's no reason to believe in the absurd propositions I just admittedly rather briefly rehearsed to you. The main reason for this, I think, is that it is a totalitarian belief.
So is gravity. So is the logical law of identity. So is all of mathematics. There is no rock you can hide under. There is no secret room in an upper loft you can be huddled in, where you can add 2 and 2 and get 3. Yes, universal beliefs are totalitarian. You can't escape them. Moreover, no sane person wants to escape all universal laws. If you put a hammer down and it falls through the table, then turns into a porcupine, this is the stuff of nightmares. It is not a description of a freedom anyone wants. Just like a man floating in space can't move because he has nothing to push off of, we need some solid, universal laws precisely in order to be free. More on this in a moment.
It is the wish to be a slave.
No, it isn't. It's the only way to avoid being a slave. Radical freedom, as you find proposed in modern philosophy, which many people will probably think of as the Enlightenment, is an entirely empty concept which is inherently impossible for the simple reason that ex nihilo nihil fit, from nothing comes nothing. Here, let me show it to you in formal logic. You can't validly put anything in the bottom line. So the Enlightenment project of let us sweep away everything, then create afresh with the exercise of nothing but reason doesn't work. First, because reason needs to feed on reality and starves to death on nothing. Second, since you're invoking your will, you haven't cleared everything away. There's still you, and you have a nature. You have properties which you didn't create and which you can't get rid of just by wishing them away. So you can either be completely unrealistic about yourself, that was the Enlightenment project, or you can actually look at reality as it is before you try to sweep it away. Which brings us back to why slave morality is so irrelevant to the real world. We're not self-sufficient gods who are the reason for our own existence. We are contingent beings. If we are to be happy at all, we must find some external, non-contingent source for our happiness, or be miserable. That's the thing about cribbing from Nietzsche. If you're going to do it, you have to go all in. You have to embrace the darkness and learn to call evil good. It's also best to have an impressive mustache. Be that as it may, saying that looking for a source for our happiness makes us slaves is to make the word slave mean nothing. You might as well say that we're slaves because we have to breathe air and eat food. As a technical detail, there is nothing invalid in what he just said because these are mere assertions that, in theory, he will go on to prove. He can't because they're obviously wrong, but whatever. He's not actually going to try very hard anyway.
It is the desire that there be an unalterable, unchallengeable, tyrannical authority who can convict you of thought crime while you are asleep.
As I said before, of course he doesn't object to the unalterable, unchangeable, tyrannical authority of the laws of physics. Yet if you take his words literally, he should. He's basically complaining that there is a thing which doesn't go away when you stop believing in it, and that this thing, call it reality, won't let him live in the fantasies inside his head. This is an old man yelling at clouds with a posh British accent. Oh, and thought crimes. There are several possibilities for what he means here. The two main options are that he thinks there's a prohibition anywhere to be found in the Bible or Quran on passing, involuntary thoughts. I've heard there are actually people who interpret Jesus' words about, if you think on a woman with lust, you have already committed adultery with her in your heart, as being about merely noticing that a woman is attractive. I'd like to give Hitchens the benefit of the doubt and assume that he's not this cataclysmically dumb. I mean, maybe he is. He gave up the faith early in life, which means he didn't learn much about it, and I gather that being drunk does inhibit memory formation, and Hitchens did spend most of his adult life drunk. That being said, let's give him the benefit of the doubt and assume that he instead means to make the consequentialist argument that if his evil deeds are limited to his imagination, he's not actually harming anyone, and so he shouldn't be punished. What this misses is the whole reason that attempted murder is a crime. If I try to assassinate you, but happen to miss, this is still a crime even though no one was hurt, precisely because the intention to do the evil is so bad we don't need to wait around for its successful completion. And yes, not all thoughts lead to action, even given the opportunity, but in a theistic system, God can tell the difference. And remember, he's discussing why Christianity would be bad if it were true. This can only be evaluated on the assumption that it is true. Evaluating Christianity on the assumption that it is false is not an argument. It's barely even assuming your conclusion. And why would the authority convict you of thought crimes while you're asleep? You're not actively thinking while you're asleep. Does he imagine God judges things on a time delay? The while you're asleep is either wrong or, well, stupid. This reminds me of the time I was accosted on the street by a fundamentalist asking me if I loved Jesus. His manner of quoting the Bible was just bizarre. He would throw out citations and partial quotations in a way that made me feel like he was throwing sand in my face. While you're asleep is just like that. Ooh, someone doing something while you sleep is bad. Never mind that it has nothing to do with anything in what he's talking about. He just associated something bad with religion. It's the same technique the fundamentalist used to associate scripture with the nonsense he was saying. It's rhetorically skillful, but let's not have any pretense that it's a logical argument.
Who can subject you, who must indeed subject you, to a total surveillance around the clock, every waking and sleeping minute of your life.
Subject you to surveillance, in this case, actually means be in the presence of. If you go out to dinner with someone, they have not kept you under constant surveillance every moment of dinner. They were there with you. They know what you did because they were present. God isn't spying on you. You're always in his presence. This is also why you can pray anytime you want to. Now, in fairness, he may actually realize this partway through, hence the correction to, who must indeed. But let's let his objection stand for a moment. So someone who is not a slave would want periods of complete isolation? What he is actually saying is that one of the great things about atheism is that if it is true, for much of life, we are completely and totally alone. Now, this is a problem I have with new atheists generally. They talk out of both sides of their mouths and seem to think it rude that we notice. They'll talk about how wonderful it is that everyone is going to die, and that's going to be the end of everything. But then they also talk about how death is terrible and awful and its existence disproves God. Because you know Hitchens would never actually try to maintain that being alone, with no one who actually knows you, is great. Atheists almost to a man think that having someone to really know you is so important that if necessary you should abandon your spouse and children to find someone who approximates that convincingly. Their usual phrasing is something about how if your marriage doesn't work, you're not doing anyone any good by being miserable. It's always important, when one is justifying something awful, to put space in between the steps, so one doesn't have to come face to face with what one is doing. Virtually the only people in the modern world who think it's actually okay to not shack up with a sexual partner who theoretically worships you, that life can actually have meaning apart from having someone you can pretend knows everything about you, are all religious people. Priests and friars and monks and nuns and so forth. Oh, and if you don't believe me about the death worship I mentioned before, listen to the next line.
I say of your life before you're born, and, even worse, and where the real fun begins, after you're dead.
Actually, the death worship gets worse, by which I mean more explicit, a little later. And I can't help but wonder if the before you're born part is a reference to original sin. I'd like to think that Christopher Hitchens wasn't that ignorant, but who knows. Complaining about original sin was surprisingly popular in anti-Catholic bashing in England in the early 1900s. Perhaps it stuck around long enough for Hitchens to catch it. And yet, as G.K. Chesterton noted, this is the one part of the Catholic faith which is empirically verifiable. No one is perfect. There are interesting theological issues surrounding it, but if you want a simple, accessible definition of original sin, it means that. The human nature we inherit from our parents is damaged and doesn't work perfectly like it should. This isn't convicting you of thought crime in your sleep before you're born. It's people passing on what they have to their children, and not passing on what they don't have. Like most everything in Christianity, it's more complicated than easy oversimplifications. But that's something which will always be true of accurate descriptions of a complex world.
A celestial North Korea.
This is so stupid I'm having trouble taking it seriously enough even to criticize it. It's like pointing out what's impractical and immoral with George Carlin's suggestion that children with pituitary problems should ride in the luggage compartment of the airplane, rather than in the seats.
Anyway, as part of this pre-boarding, they say, we would like to pre-board those passengers traveling with small children. But what about those passengers traveling with large children? Suppose you have a 2-year-old with a pituitary disorder. You know, a 6-foot infant with an oversized head. Kind of kid you see in the National Enquirer all the time. Actually, with a kid like that, I think you're better off checking him right in with your luggage at the curb, don't you? Well, they like it under there. It's dark. They're used to that.
But since people take Hitchens seriously, unlike Carlin's performance, this wasn't officially a stand-up routine, let me give it my best shot. The problem with North Korea is not that they have a powerful judicial system. It's that their judicial system is unjust. The government often convicts people of crimes they didn't commit, or worse, of crimes which are not breaches of justice, and thus should not be crimes. No one objects to an actual murderer being convicted in North Korea of committing the murder which he committed in North Korea. What sane people object to is when someone is convicted of something that should not be a crime, like telling the truth about the government, and further that the legitimate power to bring real criminals to justice is abused to make the conviction of innocent people possible. What we want is for North Korea to be just, not powerless. I wonder how this can be hard to understand.
Who wants this to be true? Who but a slave desires such a ghastly fate?
Good people. Thinking people. Sober people. Though if you're restricting it to the literal meaning of his earlier statements, and not to the thing to which he is presumably referring, no one at all desires this, because this straw man was so artfully constructed that not even maniacal imbeciles have ever held it to be true, nor wanted it to be true.
I've been to North Korea.
He should have loved it. No one convicts the ruling members of the Communist Party of anything. Kim Jong-il felt no responsibility to God at all. It's a virtual atheist paradise. But of course he's going somewhere else with this. Consistency is a property of well-thought-out arguments. Actually, I'm being very slightly unfair to Hitchens here. There have been some Christians, such as William of Ockham and Martin Luther, who did espouse the idea of voluntarism. Briefly, that morality comes from God's will rather than his intellect, so he could have given us any moral commands he wanted, rather than actually good ones. But this is an evil idea which never had any real traction among Orthodox Christians. Pretending that a minority is the entirety is inexcusable. It's like finding some scientist with a theory that Africans are stupid semi-human primates and then ascribing that to all of science, everywhere, at all times. But, still, I do need to moderate my criticism. He is correct that the Catholic Church is right that Martin Luther was wrong. Moving on.
It has a dead man as its president. Kim Jong-il is only head of the party and head of the army. He's not head of the government of the state. That office belongs to his deceased father, Kim Il-sung.
This is factually accurate to the time when Hitchens said it, but also irrelevant to anything else he's going to say. I actually just want to break up Hitchens' flow to highlight what a non sequitur the next thing he says is. Any orator knows it's possible to use one's voice to connect completely unrelated things, and credit where credit is due, he's got a nice voice and a good sense of flow. Imagine how well he could have sold a coherent argument based on true premises. Anyway.
It's a necrocracy. A thanatocracy.
This is a clever name for what North Korea officially claims to be, but only insofar as this is a joke on it not being what North Korea actually is. Thanatocracy is funny precisely because the dead don't actually rule. They can't. Because they're dead. I know it's uncool to explain a joke, but when people don't get that the joke is a joke, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to ruin it. And that's what this is. Because the people who actually run North Korea aren't dead. And to be clear, the joke is connected to what came before, but I wanted to address the joke separately. It's what comes next that is a non sequitur.
It's one short of a trinity, I might add. The Son is the reincarnation of the Father.
Being one short of something doesn't mean anything. 2 + 2 = 4 is one short of a wrong answer. Being one short doesn't even count in horseshoes or hand grenades. I was one short of having a grenade to throw at the enemy, wrote the prisoner of war. So, North Korea does not have a trinity. Also, this has nothing to do with the Christian idea of the Trinity, which is 3 persons in one substance, neither confounding the persons nor dividing the substance. Kim Il-sung was quite capable of existing independently of his son, Kim Jong-il. The son's existence was not part of the father's existence, as can be clearly shown by the fact that the father existed at a time when the son did not. North Korea is more like a 3-part government like the American government, with executive, judicial, and legislative branches. I was about to say that the North Korean government has nothing more in common with the Christian Trinity than the number 3, but then I remembered that the North Korean government doesn't even have that in common with it. The only connection between them is that Christopher Hitchens mentioned them in the same sentence. That is pretty much the definition of a non sequitur. Non sequitur just means it does not follow.
It is the most revolting and utter and absolute and heartless tyranny the human species has ever evolved.
Gee, if only Kim Jong-il felt some sort of responsibility to some higher law than his own will. Who knows? Maybe even if for no better reason than fear of an authority greater than his own, he might have been more moderate in his rule. No, wait, we're supposed to draw the opposite lesson, aren't we?
But at least you can fucking die and leave North Korea.
And there we go. Sweet, sweet death. Longing for the eternal embrace of oblivion. Does anyone think if Hitchens were reminded of this nihilistic position later, he'd own up to it? It's funny here because it's abrupt. It's a play on the idea of leaving because normally that means going somewhere else, not merely ceasing to be in a place. So much so, in fact, that in murder mysteries, when it is revealed that a person who was thought to have skipped town was actually murdered and his body hidden in the attic, the detective usually reveals it by answering the question, "Where did he go?" with, "He never left," often as he opens the trunk to reveal the corpse. That reversal of the common usage is witty and what gets applause, not the grim nihilism of saying that at least death is available to extinguish the suffering of existence. Once again, if you look at it closely, it is the presentation, not the substance, which is appealing.
Does the Quran or the Bible offer you that liberty? No. No. The tyranny, the misery, the utter ownership of your entire personality, the smashing of your individuality, only begins at the point of death.
Just in passing, by talking about the Bible rather than about Christianity, he is taking a Protestant approach which excludes the majority of Christians. But that's not the main problem. He's conflating two radically different things. I'm assuming that by tyranny, misery, and ownership of your entire personality, he's referring to judgment. This description can, of course, easily be applied to earthly governments. If you do something illegal, like murder someone, they will exercise their tyranny and ownership of your entire personality, and your misery will begin in prison. I've never heard that Hitchens was against that. In fact, far from the anarcho-libertarian he sounds like here, he spent most if not all of his adult life as a Marxist socialist. Somehow he was also against totalitarianism. Consistency does not appear to have been one of his virtues. But so far from objecting to any impingement on individual freedom, he dreamed of a state in which you couldn't even own anything. This isn't substance. The moment you actually consider what is being said, the substance is something Hitchens himself would probably call evil. The other thing he was conflating was the smashing of your individuality. Maybe this is true of hell, but no one wishes to go to hell when they wish that they could be religious. I'm not even going to go into the idea that the gates of hell are locked from the inside. Let's just stipulate a simplistic hell, where Hitler and Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer and Kim Jong-il are stripped of their individuality as they are forever roasted in fires that don't destroy them but somehow hurt anyway despite not inflicting damage. I mean, let's go full-on 6-year-old picture book understanding of hell. Even so, who cares? Who is going to say, oh no, horribly evil men are being punished for their horrible evil? But if Hitchens isn't complaining about hell, and it would be absurd for him to because of the reasons I just mentioned, he must be claiming that heaven strips your individuality. But how on earth could he come up with this? Again, let's ignore a Catholic understanding of heaven where each person becomes most fully themselves because they've been cleansed of the homogenizing effects of sin. Let's once again go full-on 6-year-old picture book, which is probably the best case for Hitchens. Where in infinite happiness, partying, and feasting can you possibly find the idea that your individuality will be smashed? Is he complaining that you won't be able to rape, murder, and steal in heaven so you'll be boringly homogenous? Surely not. But if it isn't something really dumb like that, and even if it is, once again we come up with no substance.
This is evil. This is a wicked preachment.
Hitchens' strong moral sentiments were well known. How he could possibly justify any of them, or reconcile them with the other things he said, is much less well known. I don't even know that he ever attempted to do either. In closing, I want to emphasize that I do not bear the man himself any ill will. The man had a great gift with words and a wonderful, melodic baritone voice that was close to the perfect instrument to deliver his words. And of course he was a human being with all the complexities that entails. In fact, there's a wonderful video I will link in the description, which may be Hitchens at his most human. I'll just play a short teaser from it here.
Quite certainly we're all asked, well, which is the best argument you've yet come up against from the other side? And I think every one of us picks the...
I have no objection to anyone enjoying Hitchens speaking for entertainment value. I have no objection to just enjoying listening to the man for the pleasure of hearing him speak. He was entertaining. He spoke with passion. He had all the virtues of a stand-up comedian. He was charismatic and seemed like a likable fellow. It's quite reasonable to like him for those reasons. But if you're trying to listen to Hitchens as a deep thinker, then no, that will not stand. Until next time, may you hit everything that you aim at. Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. Today I'm going to look at Christopher Hitchens. I heard a friend recently describe Hitchens as someone with solid arguments, which distressed me greatly because the man is a clown. I mean that in a nearly literal sense. He was a performer without substance. To prove my point, we're going to look at his famous rant about how Christianity, and Islam, turn life and death into a spiritual North Korea. The man has done huge amounts of work, most of which I have neither read or seen, so of course I can't say with certainty that he didn't have any rational, well thought out arguments based on premises which are not verifiably false. Let's just say I lack a belief that he had any. I am open to evidence that he did, but remember that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. He spent most of his life as a Marxist. Right there, it tells you that he was not good at being correct. Let's jump in.
Some people I know who are atheists will say they wish they could believe it. Some people I know who are former believers say they wish they could have their old faith back. They miss it. I don't understand this at all. I think it's an excellent thing that there's no reason to believe in the absurd propositions I just, admittedly rather briefly, rehearsed to you. The main reason for this, I think, is that it is a totalitarian belief.
So is gravity. So is the logical law of identity. So is all of mathematics. There is no rock you can hide under, there's no secret room in an upper loft you can be huddled in, where you can add 2 and 2 and get 3. Yes, universal beliefs are totalitarian. You can't escape them. Moreover, no sane person wants to escape all universal laws. If you put a hammer down and it falls through the table, then turns into a porcupine, this is the stuff of nightmares. It is not a description of a freedom anyone wants. Just like a man floating in space can't move because he has nothing to push off of, we need some solid, universal laws precisely in order to be free. More on this in a moment.
It is the wish to be a slave.